kind of normal things while still maintaining what had previously been permitted as lawn, and then putting some areas back as they go. But the site is, it's a huge site with a lot of these little tiny spots where it gets into the 25 and out of the 25 or into the wetland and out of the wetland. And as that delineation changed in the mid-2000s, those areas got a lot bigger in most cases for what was wetland or buffer zone.
So just so that we can come in with one, I don't know if you want to see more than one option on location, or do you prefer?
I mean, I think if you're gonna do the 2-to-1, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter which area it's done in.
Okay.
I think it's better for it to be probably cohesive, so you're establishing
A bigger
patch.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's his thoughts.
We can do that.
Okay, so would you like to continue for 2 weeks?
Please.
So until September 25th.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So are we moving on with our list and then going back?
Yes, you're going to finish the list
And then
and then go back to
The commission.
Jonathan Way and 115.
Okay, so we're moving on to Three Pond Road, nominee trust at Three Pond Road.
Mark Ritz from Site Design, representing the applicants at Three Pond Road. What you have before you is a request to do some work on a site that has been before the commission previously. A couple years ago, we delineated the off-site wetland. This is a local jurisdiction wetland only, so this is an NNOI. Portions of the site are within the 100-foot buffer. What we are proposing to do at this time is to remove an existing shed which is inside the 50, move it to a point straddling the 100-foot buffer. We are proposing to remove an existing septic system which is inside the 100-foot buffer, replace that with a sewer line going out to the street. And we are proposing to construct a pervious driveway inside the 50-foot, partially inside the 50-foot buffer, and a good chunk of it inside the 100-foot buffer, completely outside the 25-foot buffer. And that's pretty much the bulk of the jurisdictional work on the site. We are also proposing a pool and other things on the site which are outside of jurisdiction, and the reason for the driveway here is to place those features outside of buffer zones.
Okay. Any questions from the commission?
Just for my own knowledge, I know the fire pit isn't, in the fire pit area. That's not within our jurisdiction, I guess, from looking at this. And but what does that look like? I mean, I have no idea what a fire pit area.
Usually just like, a stone structure of some kind, stone block or something like that, circular, square.
Typically what we've seen for this, Maureen, is kind
Yeah.
of a patio area and then built into
Oh,
kind of the
okay,
center
so
of that
usually
patio
there's
is-
going
is
to
like-
be,
is either sunken into the patio or raised
Or
up a
raised
couple
above
feet.
it.
and so there'll be usually a hard patio
Correct.
kind of thing around
Yes.
that. Okay, no, thank
For the
you.
most part. Or the ones that don't are typically, they're not wood, they're usually just propane fired or gas fired, so it's
Yeah.
something that you're not getting crazy sparks or things kind of like. It's more of an aesthetic than a functional.
Any other questions from the commission? Questions from the public? Okay, looks like we're waiting on a file number?
No, we have
Local.
NAN 129,
Okay.
sorry. The town of Nantucket always issues their file numbers on time.
Thank you, Jeff.
That's
Okay,
on the record.
so we have everything we need to close. Would you like to close?
Yes, please.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Aye. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I'll say that to Mark also only be, we're at what, 129 in DEPs and the 3,200s for us.
So
Not
many.
including other communities.
Okay, moving on to Great State Properties at 92 Washington Extension.
They don't have a file number, and they have requested a continuance to 9/25. We'll just let them.
Looks like I'm out of here. Okay, so then we're moving back up to Phil Paston at 111, oh no, sorry, Gisella Leinhard at 11 Jonathan Way.
Sorry, I gotta get off my hands.
Hello, Jeff Blackwell for the applicant and Dan Bailey. I have several pieces of information for you. The first of which is David Haynes and I looked at the wetland boundary on on Locust, and his previous description was that of a bordering vegetated wetland, and there is a bordering vegetated wetland to the north, which is shown on the plan, but the wetland on the property, and which also spills over onto the property to the south, is actually a isolated vegetated wetland. So I have a letter here from David Haynes and a revised. I've revised the site plan to reflect that clarification about
I can share over.
the wetland. Here you go.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, those are plans for you. Simply changing bordering to isolated on locus. I want to change this plan. This wetland up here is a bordering vegetated wetland.
Might I ask, or am I interrupting your presentation?
No, no.
So I was wondering if David might be able to tell us why you came to that conclusion.
Excuse me, David Haynes for the applicant. The wetland, when I delineated, I went to the property line, and then there was an extension off of it. It went onto the other property, and I have since reviewed a couple of filings on the abutting property that show that wetland boundary swinging around and it making that part of an isolated system. It's not until you look at both properties that you know if it's isolated or not, because it went off the property, but it does not have a hydraulic connection to the wetland associated with Tom Nevers. It does with anything. It doesn't flow out of there. It's a little circular wetland system, according to the delineation that was done for the septic system over there in 2003 and I believe 2007.
So is it like perched on clay?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it not necessarily. I mean, that could be a water table situation in there, and it's just a depression. But I don't know of any clay out there.
So it's not affected by groundwater movement?
No, it would be groundwater, but it doesn't have a surface water. Water doesn't. I mean, water flows through the ground all the way through that area,
Right.
but it's not a surface water connection. It's not water flowing in a stream or directly running off. It's got to go through the ground and be filtered through the ground. I mean, that is a water table situation in there. I don't know of any clay in that area. I wouldn't expect it. It's an outwash plain well away from the moraine. I wouldn't think there would be any in there. But looking at the other delineation, it's definitely on the abutting property over in here, on nine Jonathan Way, that other plan. And there is actually a newer plan than that I didn't, see until later this afternoon, that does show it just swinging right around it. But it's very same shape as that. That's from, I
Oh,
believe,
okay.
1997,
Mhm.
and there was a 2003,
Thank you.
and maybe a 2000. Yeah, this is,
97.
yes, that one I did, last year, or I believe last year. And this was from, there's actually there is a newer delineation from 2003 and 2007. It's in your file. That was a determination.
Thank you for that information.
At the last meeting, Ernie Steinauer made a recommendation that we explore the possibility of incorporating composting toilets into the wastewater stream. And we were able to perform research on that and speak with the owner and bring her up to speed. And she gave us a green light to you know, incorporate composting toilets into this septic system. I have, it's the first time in my experience that I worked on a project with a black water, gray water separating system or setup. So there was research to be done, and I wasn't able to pull that all together for Friday, but I have, in the meantime, I've gathered up some items. The three items in the packet, and I'll send these to you digitally too. There's a DEP bulletin that describes the.
Yeah, and this is in our packet, right, already?
Yes.
This
It
is-
was,
Via
it was
email.
Yeah,
emailed.
there was three.
Oh,
Yeah.
you were able to get that into the
Yeah,
packet?
yeah, but
Oh,
it's
okay.
all there, so.
Oh,
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, I thought with the Friday deadline, I would be unable to get that in. That's great. So the DEP bulletin is sort of guidelines for engineers, and it describes the availability of using composting toilets and gray water systems for new construction, which surprised me a little bit, but it's another tool in the toolbox. So you would have, I believe, also in your screens or your packets, an example of one. It's called a Phoenix system, and it's basically you have a toilet in the house on the upper floors, first floor, second floor, and you have a composting unit in the basement, which is accessed periodically by a licensed septic hauler that would remove the composted waste and take that to the Surfside treatment plant. So the vast majority of your nitrogen and phosphorus and any other elements that are objectionable are reduced to compost and taken off site. So that helps a great deal to reduce, the normal culprits, which is total nitrogen and phosphorus. And there's also a study that I was able to find. It's referenced in the DEP bulletin of a gray water study conducted at UMass, and it's kind of dense reading, but it reinforces the reduction of contaminants that are allowed, or actually it's more directed toward the gray water qualities because black water is out of the equation. So it's very informative, and I know you haven't had a lot of time to read that. One of the elements of the composting systems, we have to satisfy Title V in in capacity, these systems are required to be able to store up to 2 years' worth of compost. So that below the first floor level for the composting unit is important. We have applied for the groundwater offset waiver, and I believe we spoke of the design of this house, and the bottom of the footings are designed to be set just above the groundwater that was observed during the soil testing. So we're not in the groundwater for the bottom of the footings, and that will allow us to build a traditional crawl space type home, which mostly will house the composting unit that's proposed. Let's see. This was not part of the, that I was able to get to Joe earlier this week, so you didn't have this on your tablets.
Thank you, Jeff.
One of the things that was a topic of a lot of discussion at the last meeting was, direction of groundwater flow and the various studies which form the basis of the Nantucket health regulations. Two of those studies were commissioned by the Nantucket Land Council. And what I did here is to just take a detail from the Horsley, Witten, Hegeman report and show that the groundwater and the groundwater contours and the direction of flow directly at the site, pushing the anything that comes out of the septic leach field in the southerly direction as we had previously represented. So it's one more piece of information. You also have, I know, and I've read the Land Council letter that was submitted since the last meeting. And one of the things that I want to reinforce is there's been, a lot of conversation about Tom Nevers Pond. Tom Nevers Pond and the bordering vegetated wetland around it is not within the buffer zone to this project, and it's should not be considered or as part of your deliberations. We have a isolated wetland on the property, which is of course within 100 feet of the project, but yet our estimate is we're some 400 feet away from the BVW around Tom Nevers Pond, and I want to reinforce that point because I don't want to get bogged down in a response to a wetland that is not on the table here. That's about all I have. I'll stop talking.
Just quickly, for the record, Dan Bailey from Pierce Atwood. I just wanted to speak to the two waivers that we've requested. First, the 2-foot separation distance, just speak a little more than Jeff did. It's my understanding.
Is that,
Is
I think that's an off
Yeah, I
mic.
think you need.
This one?
That
No.
they're both
Oh,
off.
so that's why they're down.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, again, for the record, Dan Bailey from Pierce Atwood, representing the applicant, and I want to speak to the two waiver requests. With respect to the 2-foot separation distance, I think Jeff has done a good job of explaining why we need that. There's really no alternative, especially if we're going to do a composting toilet that has to go in the crawl space underneath it. But I'd just like to do a little bit of a walk down memory lane on the purpose and genesis of that 2-foot separation distance. And this is what I've been told by others, so it's hearsay, but I've been told it by 3 different people who appear here regularly. And that was established 12 or 13 years ago, in connection with work out at Squam, where there was dewatering that was a mess. And so it was put in place to be able to regulate dewatering, and that's largely what it's been used for. And I do know, because I've been here many times and watched, that that has routinely been waived, and waived without objection from the Land Council. You know, maybe we're in a new world, but I think we've made the demonstration why we need it anyway. But I'd just like to remind the commission the purpose and the history on that. With respect to the 100-foot leach field waiver, I know that's an important one. We understand that. And that's why we're going to the measures that we're going to with things like composting toilets and gray water. You'll find in that UMass study that this type of system virtually eliminates phosphorus from the environment. And while Jeff is correct that Tom Nevers Pond is outside of jurisdiction, nonetheless, that would be the issue I think you'd probably be concerned with, is the phosphorus, and we've eliminated that. We also get a very significant reduction in nitrogen. So with respect to the 100-foot separation distance, I think we've shown that, there will be no adverse effects. We've got an isolated wetland that's not contributing hydraulically, is not hydraulically connected to the pond or any other wetlands. It's not down gradient from the septic system, and anything that's going to be in that septic system is going to consist of gray water and not have the type of pollutants that you would expect, that you would see in a normal septic system. So I'll also just mention that under Title V, which is governed by Chapter 111, Section 31, the Title V regulations say that a community can adopt regulations that are stricter than Title V, but it also says that those have to be done in accordance with Chapter 111, Section 31. The Board of Health is the approving authority, not the Conservation Commission. So to the extent that the Conservation Commission has regulations that regulate septic systems that are inconsistent with your Board of Health regulations, I would say that you are perhaps on thin ice in trying to enforce them. I don't have a case, but I was the legal consultant to DEP when they redid the Title V regulations back in the 90s, and that was one of the really hot issues, was to what degree could the state mandate Title V, because it was a really big issue at the time with local regulations exceeding Title V, and a lot of times those local regulations, people thought because if you went to 6 feet of separation distance, you had more protection than 4 feet of separation distance. That's not necessarily always the case. Anyway, that's just for the record. I think we've done a nice job of demonstrating why we justified the waivers.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't understand why you went down that particular alley. Are you trying to say that we don't have any jurisdiction over how septic systems are going to influence wetlands?
Yes. I'm not saying you don't have jurisdiction. I'm saying you don't have the authority to enact regulations that are stricter than your own Board of Health's regulations when it comes to septic systems.
And are you saying that we were trying to do so in this case?
What I'm saying is, at some point you adopted a regulation that calls for a 100-foot separation distance. You did it as a Concom matter, nor as a Board of Health matter. Regulation of septic systems is something that is exclusively the domain of the Board of Health.
And everything within 100 feet of a wetlands is in our domain, so if that's
And
the
that's the
septic
counter
system,
argument.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
that.
Sorry, I have a question
It's a
for
novel
Jeff.
interpretation.
I actually think it's pretty good, but
All right, let's
Yeah.
stick to our
Yeah,
Conservation
I have
Commission wetland regs.
I have a question for Jeff regarding jurisdictional wetland things here. So I really appreciate you including the information about the composting toilet. I had a chance to review the Phoenix information as well as this DEP guide to new construction. And I see in both of those documents, they discuss a few additional options for filtration outside of a septic system. I do see that the permitting process on those innovative things are very skim, but I was wondering if that had been considered at all with filtration or the other unconventional options that are listed by Phoenix here.
You're absolutely right. There is an ability to permit this with a filter and to basically largely eliminate the traditional components of a septic system. We don't feel comfortable bringing something that's that far out to this project. I think it's a much safer and more reliable way to deal with the waste with the gray water is to stick as close as possible to the traditional ending up in a leach field. The UMass study ran their gray water through 1, 2, and 3 foot columns and studied the composition of the wastewater going in and coming out, and it's just clear that sand component and treatment that's allowed in that sand column it just provides the best possible treatment. I would not want to see a filter be the backstop of the whole system. I just don't think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I do see the soil column ranges here, and I appreciate that. Just I was wondering if that had been considered.
Yeah, no, we don't have that. And putting myself in your shoes, I wouldn't want to propose it.
Yeah, I didn't like that option.
Yeah.
So just to hop on, since you said my name, so I get to talk now too, is just to make a clarification to the Board of Health and Septic System regulations. Our local Board of Health do have septic system regulations that require leaching fields to be at least 100 feet from a wetland, with one exception being lots created prior to the enactment of that regulation max out at a 330 gallon per day flow, which is what this is designed to do because this lot predates that. So our 100-foot restriction isn't outside of the keeping of or stricter than the Board of Health regulation, with the exception built into the Board of Health regulation that allows for a restricted flow for lots that predate the regulation. With a lot of predates that go through there, but it's something where we've run into that before, but I know that's just their local regulation 52 that has that in there. So this falls within that exception, though. I just don't want to get yelled at by our director of Board of Health for not knowing the regulation.
You're on the record.
He'll give me an earful later.
You got it.
Any other questions from the commission? So one thing that I'm just wondering about, because the original plan we got, said that it was a bordering vegetated wetland delineated on April 11th, 18. And so does, and now, this is the same date with the isolated vegetated wetland, and I just didn't know if the date needs to change there, because the first time around, we were submitted the bordering. So how does that work?
So, well, so to save you the trouble, the performance standards still essentially apply the same. It's just making sure that the resource area is correctly labeled. This happens from time to time where you run across the wetlands that go over property lines you don't have access to, where you're safer to assume bordering, because then you're also making sure you're including state regulations in the state act. Where isolated wetlands are regulated a little bit differently through the state act, but our performance standards apply to both evenly. Bordering and isolated for our local regulation and local bylaw regulate them essentially as the same. So it's the date where the work was still done is there. Our verification for the line that's on the lot is still correct and sound. It's just in the order to be identified as an isolated vegetated wetland on that specific resource area.
Are there any questions from the public?
RJ Turcott, Nantucket Land Council. So I would just like to clarify a few things about the Horsley Witten Hagman study that we commissioned in 1990, I believe. If we are to take this groundwater flow, this horizontal groundwater flow, the way it's going on the map, it's going to pass within 30 feet of this isolated vegetative wetland. And through capillary action alone, this is going to have an adverse impact. And I'd also like to clarify, it was just stated by Mr. Bailey that this will result in a reduction of nitrogen. It will be an increase in nitrogen. There's no effluent system coming from this site right now. So no matter what system you put in, there will be an increase in effluent on this site. So even discounting Tom Nevers, if this is in fact an isolated bordering or isolated vegetated wetland, it's going to pass close enough. If it is going in a straight line perpendicular to this water table measurement, capillary action will carry some of these nutrients into that wetland and have an adverse impact. The other thing that the study states is that groundwater tends to curve toward wetlands when they get close to wetlands. They don't necessarily follow that perpendicular arrow to the water table near wetlands and near ponds, which is why they are wetlands and they are ponds, is because that's where the groundwater is going. And lastly, that same study recommends that we limit development in this area because of how stressed it is. So that's all I'd like to clarify.
Thank you. Any other questions from the commission?
If I could, we will be asking for continuance until the 25th so that Ernie can read in the information and we can address questions at the meeting on the 25th and also have more detail on the composting system, the trees, and anything else that you would ask for additional information at this time.
Okay. So you'd like to request a continuance till the
Yes.
25th? Okay. So we will continue until September 25th.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so 115 Baxter Road LLC and 117 Baxter Road LLC at 115 and 117 Baxter Road.
For the applicant, Art Gasparo, Nantucket Engineering, along with Stephen Cohen. This is the second public hearing for the proposal to relocate the structure away from the eroding coastal bank at 115 and 117 Baxter Road, which are two lots that have been combined together and held in common ownership. And as you may recall, we had a discussion at the first meeting. There was pretty much, I think, unanimous agreement for supporting the relocation of the structure. There was some discussion about the reuse of the existing foundation, and we have provided a revised plan and letter. The changes that have been made would be to fill the foundation of the main portion of the structure with drill holes in the bottom of the slab that's there, and then fill it with clean compacted sand from the excavation for the at the location of the relocated structure, and then to maintain the portion of the right now there's currently a drive under garage type basement, so that would be maintained for that use. You can see on the plan that portion of the structure is further away from the bank than the main portion of the house. So they put a deck on top of that, and there's sort of already a dividing line where in the foundation where we're showing that it would be maintained, and we would just fill that in with concrete block to the extent needed, and then the owners would be able to still have the use of some storage in the driveway and place to keep a Jeep or whatnot in that area. And I believe that essentially is the change. You may have noticed that there was a letter of support from the direct abutters who were here at the start of the meeting. They favor the application and feel strongly that the foundation should remain in place so as to not cause destabilization of the bank in the vicinity of their property. And with that, we'd be happy to try to address questions or concerns that you may have with the proposal.
I just want to
Yes, Stephen.
piggyback one other thing, that on the abutting two lots where the houses were moved, both of the foundations were left and filled, which is something, information we didn't have last time.
Any questions from the commission?
Yeah, this porch and stoop shown on the plan, is that existing or is that going to be added there?
Yeah, the porch exists and would be relocated. We have shown that right now there's a set of stairs that go up in front of the house, parallel with Baxter Road. In order to increase the separation distance from the bank as much as possible, we've shown a reconfiguration to put those stairs on the side of the house, just to pick up that extra 5 feet or so every, that could be a couple of years difference that the house may last. So that's the proposal. And then instead of having a deck there's currently it's a remainder of a deck. It's not in the best of shape. We would replace that with a patio in the outside of the 25-foot buffer zone.
Yeah, but I don't know if you were getting at this or not, but if we retained the garage and filled the rest, I think
Yeah.
we'd remove the porch and the stoop and the.
Oh,
deck.
That's what I was
absolutely.
asking
I'm
right
sorry.
here, if this is going to come out where this
Yep.
is getting filled.
Yeah, we should have been more clear about that.
To just expand on that a little bit, the only thing that would remain is the area to the north of the line on the plan shown as maintained.
Okay.
And would you still be all right to remove the foundation when it gets, close to the bluff?
I put that in the letter
Yeah.
to you, that when we get to 5 feet, when the bank reaches 5 feet within the portion of the structure that was maintained, it would be removed in its entirety.
Okay. Thank you.
I had a question about the 5 feet. I mean, I appreciate, that thought, but, we've had erosion along this bluff that, happens very quickly sometimes, so, I'm just wondering, is 5 feet sufficient? I mean, does anybody have any thoughts about that? It seemed like a fairly short, I mean, you might easily get into that without realizing it, or, I mean, what do you think?
I mean, me personally, I would remove the whole thing now.
Yeah, no, I know.
Because it's, already an unstable bluff for the most part. It's gonna need to be removed at some point. And really any action we're doing up here is destabilizing the bluff. You know, what destabilized it was putting something in there in the first place. So, you know, that's where I fall with this, but 5 feet is something concrete for us. You know, I don't know how everybody else feels about that.
Could you just,
I still oppose them putting a waterproof deck on top of it, and I agree with you that it should be removed.
could you refresh us on the current distance between the part that's being maintained and the top of the bank right now?
I'm sorry that I don't have my scale with me. It would be,
It's pretty
I'm gonna,
close to
I'm
5
gonna
feet on the
estimate that
corner.
it's about 20 feet. You could see on the plan where I have the 25-foot buffer zone shown.
Mm-hmm.
So we would take the deck off that is to the north. So it's somewhere around 20 feet, plus or minus.
The existing structure, Art, on the southeast corner is much closer, right?
Yes, I believe
Yeah.
that the question was the distance to the part that would be maintained, but certainly, it's probably 5 feet or so, to the foundation of the part to be, filled.
Right.
So just as a comp, the part that's marked porch that's within the road layout is 7.5 feet. You wanna use that as a visual scale?
So it looks like about twice that, so maybe 15 feet or so, maybe a little bit more.
Probably a little more, right?
Yeah, somewhere between 15 and 20, I would say, but.
Right.
I mean, if the corner is already close to 5 feet, you know, once it hits that 5 foot, you can't just remove the corner, you'd be removing the whole thing.
Right.
So, and I agree with Ian, putting the waterproof deck on to me is like building a structure in a place we wouldn't allow it. So I appreciate the change, but personally couldn't vote for it.
Can I ask you a question, Ian?
Yeah.
Are you distinguishing between that and, say, a little roof as if it's on a garage?
Well, it sounds as though it's the equivalent. It's construction,
Yeah.
so.
So you mean basically anything
On
on
this,
top of the
right.
foundation? Yeah, as opposed to one that's okay and one isn't, you just mean anything?
anything.
Okay, I just wanted that clarification.
Yeah, I just have a problem taking the foundation out now. I think there's enough space that I would rather see it remain, and then within that 5 feet, then the disturbance already happened, get rid of the foundation. I just hate to, I think if you do it now, you're gonna destabilize even more.
I'm with that train of thought. I think it should be left till it gets exposed enough where that it has to be removed. Otherwise, you're gonna escalate it immensely by going in there and ripping it out. You'll end up losing everything there prematurely.
Well, how about there's holes in the pad and just filling it and then letting it erode and fall,
Well, that's what
as
they're
so
doing.
many things
Would-
do.
Which I think is fine. That's the way
Yeah.
to go.
Yeah.
Well, that's what they're doing.
So let it fall and then pick it up off the beach?
No, I think when they get in the 5 feet, they have to
Then they
remove that
remove it.
section.
Yeah, they have to take it out.
Corner's pretty close to 5 feet, that's just where,
So they'll come in the spring, or they come in, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna go, but I wouldn't try to,
I mean, you're out there a lot, aren't you, Art? So,
So my motivation for asking for a vegetated type cover last meeting was to strike the balance between not wanting to make a new structure, but not wanting to destabilize the bank. And I'm not an engineer. I don't know if it's possible. I don't know if it's permittable. But is there a possibility to essentially have a foundation with like no cap on it, just essentially built into a vegetated soil cover? Or is that hydrologically impossible? Or
I think we could do that. I'm not sure the other commissioners would distinguish between a green roof. That's what you're talking about?
yeah, green roofs require a fair amount of structure to
There
support.
you
go. Okay, yeah, I mean,
you'd have to
I-
put steel in there to carry the weight.
I don't
Now you're
know
really
these
working.
things from an engineering perspective,
Yeah.
but having a material at the top of that structure that could soak up water rather than being waterproof is helpful in my opinion, if it's possible. I just don't know if it's possible.
I know last time we were talking about the concern about the stability of this, the foundation walls. And Dave, I think you said something about, if it's not like if one just left it like an open, 4 open walls, that the walls without filling it in some fashion, then the walls were not,
They're not supported
they would not-
structurally
they
at the
wouldn't-
top,
they wouldn't-
especially with
so
block.
they might
wanna cave in.
they might cave in, right, okay.
But if you fill it with compacted soils.
But if you fill in with soil, it's not gonna.
Yeah.
Or if you
But you
build
were
in a
saying
deck.
like leaving on open
on
walls.
top.
Or the deck is what spreads the walls apart,
Yeah, but.
which is what we're not, some people are opposed
Right.
to doing.
Well, I've been, going back and forth on this in my mind about, and it's really, it's guesswork about, to some extent, about when this falls and whether or not the fact that whether removing it is going to be worse or not. But I did find myself finally coming down on the fact that constructing something, I just think is not the way to go here. Adding something, to the picture. I think that, this, even the proposal, the different proposal that you brought in tonight, still, there's going to be a lot of disturbance on this site with moving the house and everything else. And I think that, to my mind, it makes more sense to remove the other now, to be essentially, this foundation's no longer to be a foundation, and so to take it out at this point in time. There's gonna be other disturbances going on, and then that's out, and we don't have to worry about, the rate of erosion and the thing falling down the bluff. I understand the arguments on the other side, but I think that the resource area deserves to have that taken out, and that's, the whole, I think that deserves to be taken out, so, the entire foundation.
Any other thoughts or comments from the commission?
Yeah, I just don't see moving the house causing that much impact. I mean, it's a pretty quiet process, believe it or not. I think removing that foundation is just gonna be detrimental to that coastal bank. I think they're gonna lose it, it's gonna fall in. I would rather see it filled in, and then when then they come in that 5-foot buffer, then remove the foundation. I just can't see that being removed right now. I think it's gonna be really impactful, more than, I'd rather see it remain. And whether it's springtime, it's springtime, but.
Now open it up to the public. Some more questions, comments? Questions from the public?
Archie Turcott, Nantucket Land Council. This question might be better directed to Jeff. Has the commission in the past allowed someone who is moving their house to build on the foundation that was left behind before?
It's my knowledge, this is the first time someone has asked for this.
Right. So, I'm just sensing a bit of a double standard here. If the house is in imminent danger and it has to be moved, then other structures would also be in imminent danger and should not be allowed to be built there. I understand destabilizing the bank and waiting as long as possible, especially in the opinion of the neighbors and courtesy of the neighbors, not destabilizing the bank, so leaving the foundation in place, but building another structure where the applicant just came in and said, we're in imminent danger, whether it be a deck or a garage, it's just continuing that liability. I don't know how the commission feels going forward on that, but it's obviously gonna continue happening as this bluff continues to erode. And the land council feels that'd be best just to move the house as far away as possible on that other lot and then just fill it in, just fill the foundation in. And my last question would be, who is responsible for making sure that the applicant does, in fact, when it reaches 5 feet, they don't drag their feet and they actually remove this foundation in a timely fashion, rather than just kicking the can down the road and it turns into a liability for the town and we have a foundation dropping however far onto the beach below.
So just to clarify, when I said fill in the foundation, I meant the whole foundation. So,
Okay.
So to answer that, I mean, that's certainly something that we've conditioned similar things before for removal. And real quick, RJ, could you do me a favor? Could you stand the little tiny microphone? Nope.
Oh, this.
That one, back up. Sorry. You condition it, you could either set it up to have some sort of escrow or performance bond that could be activated by the town in lieu of lack of action. We obviously would want to set, you know, whether it's in 5 feet, I don't think you say it has to be removed in, 12 hours, because I just don't think you get mobilized to do it, but I think you would set a time window within there, and in that condition say, if not removed by the end of that time window, then that performance bond can be activated at the commission's discretion for removal, and then that would at least be put out in a condition that would be known to everybody. So I think that's, it's similar to how we deal with removal for erosion control structures of some kind, where you have that mechanism to say, if it's not working and the applicant's not living up to the responsibility, we still have the ability to activate a way to do it at their expense to make whole the permit. So that would probably be the easiest mechanism to do that.
Jeff, I have a question, if that's okay. I don't want to interrupt you.
Speaking to the
Yeah, I have to
microphone.
use this one, unfortunately. Yeah.
So, my understanding with the removal conditions is typically that they are, as it becomes exposed, as to within a certain amount of feet. Is that right? Or has the commission trended towards this 5 foot? That, because I can't think of one that has that, but I can think of a lot that say as it becomes exposed.
There's been mostly as it's become exposed. We haven't done, most of the house moves in these similar situations have either been done through friendly enforcements or emergencies,
Yeah.
and haven't had the same, a lot of them have just been filled in, and then as they expose, I mean, I'll be the first to say, like, Sheep Pond's the perfect example. Most of those, a corner of that foundation exposes, and you see it, and then you just simply, we've ordered them removed or dealt
Yeah.
with at that point.
So
I think 5 feet is a good mechanism to start mobilizing to get things ready, if necessary, because we don't want it to be a case where you expose a certain amount and then you're picking up from the beach. Dealing with a situation unsafe for removal or demolition.
I think that the 5 feet that we had put in the letter was related to the portion that we were hoping to reuse. And the discussion that I'm hearing now, we pretty much already have a portion of the structure that's at 5 feet, or it's
Right.
it's probably 5 feet. So if the point may be moot if we're talking about removal of the whole thing when any portion reaches the 5 feet. That's about where we're at right now. So I think that what I'm hearing is that the reuse of the garage likely doesn't have majority support, and so the question seems to be whether or not we would be allowed to fill and then remove it as it becomes exposed,
5 feet,
foot
yeah.
rule, because that doesn't really make a lot of sense. I don't think we would bother, or I wouldn't say bother, but I don't think that it would make a lot of sense to go through the effort of filling, and then I'm not really sure
And you've got to excavate to remove.
what the trigger is when you say, when we start talking about this 5 foot, because is it for the whole thing? Or is it for the
Yeah,
portion that's within the 5 feet? Maybe that's something we need to discuss, but, because we're already there. And if you're gonna say, I was saying as to try to address some of the concerns for last time for the portion to be reused, that we would take that whole thing out at 5 feet. But now that we're sort of in a different, I think, discussion, I would say that, it would make the most sense, or the option would be to poke the holes to fill it, and then as it becomes exposed, you remove the portions that become exposed. And if some of it
Which
were
is,
to fall,
I think, what
I think that's what is typically done.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't usually rip out like
No.
like I'm thinking Sheep Pond, or there's not a lot of cases that I could really think of in good examples, but even when they become exposed, you don't then go and dig out the whole thing typically. It's
You
as
take it
it
out in
kind of
pieces.
needs to be taken out, you take it out, and then that whole portion of the bank doesn't become that big shark bite, if you will, which is what's gonna happen. If we take the whole thing out and we then fill that with unconsolidated sediment, it's gonna wanna slump there, and it's gonna, one of the concerns, of course, is, especially to the neighbors and to the other house, that it's gonna sort of artificially have, a retreat of the top of the bank there.
Yeah.
It's gonna accelerate it.
And then you'll have the retreat, you'll have the shark bite, and then you'll have a ravine there because of the depression.
How deep does that foundation go below the surface?
Well, the grade changes significantly from there, but it's essentially an 8-foot foundation wall. So,
Plus the footings.
on
Yeah,
the high,
plus the
plus the
footing.
footing, so you could say, right, it's maybe like 9 feet from, on the high side,
Mm-hmm.
but then on the road side, it's,
Couple feet.
only a couple of feet.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the destabilization through removal, but I think if any of it exposes, then you're assuming the bluff's gonna keep coming back, so you're gonna get heavy equipment up there every time. I mean, I feel like one time, try and stabilize it, once it exposes, even if it's a corner.
I think
Well,
with
why
CMUs,
don't-
you can take them out by hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
I don't
the-
think you
it's-
use heavy equipment to do
No.
that.
No,
it's just
and then
pop-
you're gonna take probably a partner saw and cut the
Cut the
footing.
slab and
Yeah.
Yeah.
take that out. Just take it out as it needs to be, as needed.
Right,
Like-
which is,
like
which is I
all
think how
the
they do it now, they go
yeah.
in with saws by hand, and
Yeah.
whatever.
Yep.
But, so I have, I guess, a question of procedure, which is, so I'm gonna defer to, Dave and Joe when it comes to the actual engineering of this, cause I have no expertise in this whatsoever. But I take a point about whether you have consolidated or unconsolidated, either sand or soil, that surely you would want it to be consolidated rather than unconsolidated. It's precisely so that you don't have this issue.
We do compacted, you can't.
Compacted, thank you, yeah. So, and we draft that accordingly, I assume, in the order of conditions, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that the distinction, if I may, back and forth, was, and I should have expounded on that, was naturally consolidated versus.
Like virgin sand, sand that's there, and then they're putting sand there.
Right.
They're
It will never be as compact and consolidated as glacier rock, so. But the point being, certainly, no matter which route we would go, I would want to see that was filled in lifts that were compacted.
And so should we structure, assuming that we're in agreement, that, we should structure the orders of conditions so that it was done appropriately with someone, overseeing it?
Yes, I mean, the plan specifically calls for it to be filled with compacted sand. They use the words so that,
it's there.
for that reason.
to the language.
And then I think in order to obtain a certificate of compliance, it's gonna have to be done, that's gonna be the, direction that's provided to the contractor as well. They're gonna get the plan, they're gonna get the order conditions.
They don't wanna expose the foundation and all that new fill, and then it just become like an hourglass pouring out.
Right.
So they want that to be stable. They wanna use Hardner and,
But Jeff could certainly draft a condition to require verification.
yeah.
Well, and, you know, especially since the neighbors are so concerned, I would have thought we want to draft it in such a way that it alleviates their concerns.
Sure. And in this case, the client is their own neighbor on the other side, so.
Right.
Mhm.
And then would you be willing to put some sort of escrow in for if this gets onto the beach?
So, if my client were here, she would tell you that she is not of the means of the rest of the residents, and that would, I think, be very burdensome on her, more so than perhaps some of the other people in the area. And I don't know if that's something you might wanna think about that is triggered once we have exposure, that you could write in now or something like that, but just to have money sitting there way in advance would be, I think, hard on them.
Well, but I mean, you don't have to, it could be a bond, so that you don't have to have the entire amount of money. I mean, you buy a performance bond, I believe it doesn't, it's not, you know, that it's gonna cost $10,000 to do this, and so I have to put $10,000 in the bank somewhere. I buy a bond, you know, I have to pay for that, but it's assuring that the 10,000 will be there. The bond company is assuring that the 10,000 will be there, so it's not that she has to, you know, put the money in a mattress or something.
I think that's something that, I mean, obviously, we're not gonna issue out an order tonight after all this discussion. I think we can look into a number of options that are available for you guys to try to accomplish that goal.
And perhaps Steve could advise.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk to Jeff, and I think that there are, like I said, a couple of different ways. And as you likely have become experienced with at this point, that because the project involves putting the road partially in the public way, in this case the county road, the town is also issuing a license and requiring a 1B BGF easement, so there will be conditions attached to that as well, and as well as the zoning board of appeals decision that has already been issued, requires that the owner of the lot is responsible for addressing any removal that's required. So the zoning enforcement officer could bring a enforcement case on that grounds, and the town will have its own grounds. So, yeah,
There's a lot of mechanism there.
yeah, there's a lot of mechanism there, and I can chat with Jeff about it too. So we can certainly come back and try to address that. Thanks.
So we're all in agreement that the capping of a deck on the garage section is not a feasible thing, yeah. Just trying to be clear.
I think this needs to be considered like effectively vacant after this is done, you know, non-structural,
Yeah.
until that thing exposes.
So we are under, you know, a bit of time crunch on this in terms
move
of
the house.
trying to obtain a building permit to get this structure relocated. And I guess our only question would be, you know, we can keep the hearing open to propose,
I'm not sure what we could do.
or we could close, but I'm just wondering about the order. So we're talking that it would be, the foundation would remain subject to having a performance bond, where we're.
Well, I think we could.
I think we
I
need
just
an
wanna have the
updated
hearing-
plan.
wanna have the hearing
Don't we-
closed
We need an
and not
updated
have us
plan.
be able to discuss
Yeah.
this with you, 'cause I know
Sure.
that if we close the hearing now and then you discuss the draft, the orders, and then we maybe can't discuss it, so
Yeah, I mean, my feeling is we should probably keep this open until we have
Have a
a
draft
plan
order.
submitted, you know, without this deck on there, you know,
That's fine. Okay, so we'll request a continuance unless there's something else.
But before
Well-
they do, I guess, request me a continuance, but effectively at the next meeting, to also have a draft order for the relocation of the house with the filling in of the existing foundation with conditions to deal with its removal approval upon exposure.
Mhm.
Yes.
That's essentially what we're doing. I just
Yes.
wanna make sure we get
Okay.
all
Yes.
that, all of
That's
that.
what I was hoping to
Okay.
So you could do your job, Jeff?
And I know it was said by the applicant that they're not going to use mechanical methods, but we should condition that no heavy
Sure,
equipment
yeah,
as well.
we've done that a lot where we've just required all removal to be done by hand, so
Yeah.
that's something where we can certainly put that into conditions, discuss that.
So you need to go to the HDC, did you say, or? to-
No. Not at
Not
this
now.
point.
No.
No, the HDC has approved the moving of the house, and there's no current approval for a new structure at that site. So we would only have to go back if the garage was authorized, which
Okay.
it's not.
So, this isn't delaying your timetable for moving the house?
No, that's the reason we wanna have it happen again, another
Yeah,
one of
we
these,
just wanna
another
be
draft
done.
order.
We want Jeff to feel comfortable coming in the next meeting with a draft order.
So they can go, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so you.
Request a continuance, and I'll provide a revised plan about the maintaining of the portion of the structure.
Okay, and that's for September 25th?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And, I think, Seth, you should talk to the HDC about authorizing marine roofs, cause they're great, but I can't think of one in Nantucket.
Yeah, no one's brave.
Yeah.
Okay, moving into the amended orders of conditions, we have 85 North Sankaty Road at 85 North Sankaty Road.
Good evening again, David Haynes for the applicant. This is this was a notice of intent you heard about a month ago. And of course, after we got it all approved and everything, we hired a landscape architect and started moving things around. So this is it's actually, we debated about whether or not it would be a minor mod or an amendment. I felt that the amendment was more appropriate. The difference between this and the previous plan is the cabana and the pool have shifted location slightly. The cabana has become closer to the wetland, but still maintaining a 50-foot setback from the structures. There's a new patio with a fire pit that's in the buffer zone, but within what was proposed to be existing lawn. And the demarcation of the undisturbed buffer between 50 and 25 has been adjusted slightly. Before we had it at 37 and a half straight across. In this case, it goes down to probably 10 or 12 in one area, and then it varies slightly, but it's still, we are not altering more than 50% of the area between 25 and 50.
Why did they do that? Is that just because of the contours?
A sense of arrival. When they wanted
Roll out the red carpet.
I mean, it doesn't really, I mean, it still meets your regulations. You can go down to 25 according to your regulations, but you can't alter more than 50% of the 25 to 50, which this does not do.
Okay, they just
It's a
changed the
slight-
layout.
It's so they could have a better view looking down between the cabana under the pergola and into the lawn area. But it's not a,
I get it. I just was a question.
It's a preference, but your regulations do cite.
So
maybe
it's
a
not more than
50
50.
foot Or 25 foot, which would,
Where's the 25? I thought, so,
Is it here, right?
This is the,
Right here.
yeah,
this is the 25,
Yeah.
this is the 50. Before we had drawn a line that went basically across like this, right at 37 and a half. Now, this goes slightly inside of that, but most of it is actually outside of that.
So it's not more than 50%.
Not-
still.
Definitely not more than 50%.
Alright.
It meets your performance.
Right. Okay.
No other structure. There is I was provided finally with a landscape plan that does reflect all the same things, but does call out that there would be the same limit of the lawn, any of the plantings that they're doing, everything else between 50 and 25 outside of the lawn is just going to be allowed to naturalize. I mean, it is natural, and it's going to be allowed to regrow. And then they would do plantings up the side, and this just documents what the plantings were for your record. So basically, nothing will occur outside of the lawn area between 15 and 20.
Any questions from the commission?
Seth, can I see that?
Yes.
Just quick. Okay.
Any questions from the public?
Move to approve the amended.
All
Second.
in favor?
Aye.
Carries unanimously. Thank you.
It's been a long night.
So moving on to Terry Kelly and Aveen Irwin at 87 Comic-Con Road.
Jeff Blackwell for the applicants. This is a property that was before you 2-3 months ago for an amendment to allow the final configuration of the what will be the main house off to the left-hand side of the drawing. The application to amend that's before you tonight is to allow construction of a shed to house Terry's landscaping business, which is more than 50 feet away from the bordering vegetated wetland, and to also swing the driveway, the existing driveway, over around the shed, and which would require relocation of a mature privet hedge that was planted by the neighbor some years ago, and it was mistakenly planted well onto Terry and Aveen's property. So there's 3 elements to the shed, the driveway modification, and also to replant that privet along the property line. The foundation of the shed is going to be a monopore, so that the footings, the sidewalls, and the slab will be poured all at once. Terry describes this design as only extending 30 inches into the ground, and there'll be no open space, crawl space beneath the building. It will be a true slab. So I asked him about groundwater, and there's a well over here near the future main house. So he went over and took the well case off and measured down 17 feet. He said that the groundwater in the well can fluctuate by about 2 feet. He's seen it as close as 15 feet to the ground surface. So I wanted to have the information for you tonight.
Seems pretty clear.
Questions or concerns from the commission?
No.
None.
My concern was that I couldn't get the receipt.
The PDF
Right.
was tough.
Is the, you mean because it's
Yeah.
crunched down? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it didn't
It's
go out.
very pixelated.
I tried to incorporate color and everything into
You did a great job, Jeff.
Well, color,
I like,
very-
I like
color
very
colors.
helps,
colorful.
definitely helps.
Color always helps.
You did a great job.
Ah, thank you.
You stayed within the lines,
Wait till
too,
I
yeah.
tell my mother.
So just one small question.
Yep.
Talking about the relocation of the privet hedge, you're talking about taking the plants that are in the green row now and taking the same plants and putting them to the red?
Yes.
And then what's going to happen to where the green line was? Now.
Well, partially, the red stippling and the red dashed line is the
Oh, the
extent
driveway?
of the proposed driveway
Mhm.
configuration. So
Doesn't it?
partly
Does-
that will
okay.
come in there. The rest of it, what's your pleasure? Are you looking for meadow, sort of something that might be mowed once a year?
Yeah, if you would be willing to do that, we would love it.
Okay. I feel pretty confident that they would want to maintain probably a 2-foot strip along the edge of the driveway to be mowed consistently, but the rest of it could meadow if that's
Mm-hmm.
acceptable.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns? Is there a motion to approve the amended order?
So,
Is there a
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
So moving into minor modifications, we have 11 Meadow Lane LLC at 11 Meadow Lane.
Sure. Paul Santos asked if I could take care of this tonight, be back on my way. So what they're looking to do on this site, and it's already kind of within the scope of work, is reconfigure, the deck outside of the approved guest house that's there. They improved some decks around the property as part of the project before. We feel that changes within the scope of the.
Move to approve the
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Moving into certificate of compliance. Oh, no,
Nope.
those are both
Continued,
continued.
yeah.
Okay, on to orders of conditions.
Here we go.
Take one and pass them around. There should be enough. We have a couple from that we closed the last time. And I think if we could, we should hold the Old South Fork to the very end. Just to sit a little bit longer. Or if you guys want to.
She's watching it on
Do
TV,
that one first.
making sure she knows where he is.
That's flat Rick.
There's two ahead of you.
Alright, so just we'll just go in the order that's there, I guess. So, Marshall Fader's the one from 36 Liberty Street, not more Liberty. And you're accused from this. We closed this last time, so just kind of included in there, just have a reporting requirement for any herbicide, pesticide, or fertilizer. No fertilizer that we talked about within the 25 proposed zone resource area. All irrigations to be temporary, just for establishing vegetation. Debris to be removed by hand, invasive species to be removed, and yearly photographs showing the condition of the site.
Do we need a finding here that says that the pond now does have a functional connection to groundwater?
I'm not sure that we ever really officially determined that the pond itself has a functional connection to groundwater.
I
Or
thought
the
some, I
wetlands?
thought he said
I
it
thought she
did.
talked about it and how it like impacts the whole system when she cleans it out.
I would say she talked about it, but I don't think we
It's not
actually have any
science.
numerical data that clearly shows that. However, I will say, and I don't know, as the second page of this order got cut off, so I don't think we even got some conditions here. I don't know where it disappeared to. So it's in there. There are a few more, and there is a later, there's a condition 26 that I had put in there.
I know we had talked about conditioning, not allowing the seasonal tenting or whatever
Right, that it couldn't have a floor.
yeah, it could have a floor and then it couldn't
Yeah.
be next to the,
Just to read through the ones we have, there's a 26 that, commission shall be notified of any work to be done within the man-made pond at least 72 hours to the work beginning and shall be subject to inspection by commission staff. And she talked about managing her water lilies. And then I also have a 27, because this is what started this whole adventure, is any water removed or drained from the pond shall be done to an area outside of the commission jurisdiction. So they were running a hose from the pond into the wetland next door. That was kind of what started this odyssey. So,
Just putting it from here to there.
28, any temporary structure,
They were adding to the wetland, you know?
any temporary structure, shall not have flooring.
yeah, and shall not be placed in a way as to compact the wetland
Yeah.
buffer area.
Yeah. Shall not be within the resource area. Or compacting the buffer zone. There we go. Other than that, that's what I have there.
I mean, I know we talked a little bit about the like native species no cultivars being added. Is there anything speaking to that?
Oh, we got it, 29.
Yeah.
Do you want that inside the 50?
Yeah.
Species within 50 foot setback. Shall be native species.
Is there a motion to approve as amended?
So moved.
Is there a
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, that carries unanimously. Commissioner Golding recused.
Ernie was recused, too. Yes, Bob was running recused for him.
You don't even have to sign it.
He doesn't have to sign it.
We have enough to sign.
Oh, you did?
Okay, so moving
Thank you.
on to 9 North Avenue.
This was another one that we closed last time.
And I'd been recused from this one.
That's right, 9 North Ave. This was the two buildings being relocated within the flood zone and into the zoning setbacks. And then the conversion of that driveway from asphalt to pervious.
Parking.
Park. So the other ones I had on there were the fertilizer, irrigation, our regular kind of sort of pesticide and herbicide. And then I also had in 22, the parking of vehicles shall be contained within the designated parking area.
Mm-hmm.
Keep that from this.
Yep.
I know like 2 of our 4 trips to that site, we were cars parked on the grass.
Yeah, every time I've been down there, they're all over the
I mean,
place.
they could
So-
like sell parking spots out there downtown, so. Well, now they can't. That's-
I wish it had been in the house.
When we were working on the Brant Point Inn, there's a ton of people that used to park down there.
Right.
I mean, it was like loaded up.
At Dolphin Court, you see it looking
Yeah,
too.
Approve as drafted?
Yeah, is there a second?
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
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 So that carries with, Commissioner Engelberg recused, excuse me. It's a long day.
Bemused.
I'm still at the school, like, it's
Nor
all
am
a
I.
blur. Okay, so, moving on to New England Development, Old South Wharf.
I'll be honest, I really just, I kind of memorialize the location to. But other than that,
Oh, thank you.
I guess if we wanna add a condition 20, that,
Yeah.
all removed, figure piers, shall be,
Really, the way that,
stored off-site
the way they'll do that is
if
they'll
they are.
put that all in a barge,
Yeah,
and take it
that's what I'm
away.
saying.
It's just, cause the way the crane's based and everything, it'll never really hit the ground.
Did we have to discuss the height of the cap of the bulkhead, or no?
So they put that in there, we can add a condition 21 that the final height and material of the bulkhead cap shall be provided for the commission to review.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Libby.
Oh,
She's so loud.
well, our mics
She's
are
not even
so
using a mic.
stinky.
Yeah, no, I was just talking, wait a minute, that is.
Right by your house, you can hear her talking.
She's at home. She's still in Canada.
No way.
Anything else?
A.
on this one?
Hoser.
I was missing.
Wait, is there a motion to approve as amended? Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
You're good.
So moving on to 262 Homeless Road.
Didn't close.
Okay.
Pond.
It's on the back.
So 3 Pond Road,
Really?
the shed,
It's almost over.
and the fire pit and the sewer connection, they had the pool outside the jurisdiction, they didn't figure out the driveway. I had to think of it. We'll back you. See you at the boxing tonight.
Wait a minute now, that's right. You better be careful.
I already know.
Mum's the word on that stuff.
That's why I said the box is cool.
Yes. Means somewhere else.
Should I just write absent or just nothing?
For which one?
The
Yeah.
pier.
Yeah,
Just leave
you
it
weren't
blank.
here.
As long as we have at least 4 signatures on it.
Yep, that's on, double checking.
Alright, so I didn't have any conditions for 3 Pond Road, this is the one for 5.
Any thoughts from the commission?
Okay.
A motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So that passes.
Okey dokey.
So moving on to other business, approval of minutes from August 28th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good. Monitoring reports?
I have to say I was not present at the last meeting for
No
crack.
monitoring.
No monitor
Move
was-
the crack, we're good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Well, there's none. Yeah, there you
Okay.
go.
So no monitoring reports, no crack. What about CPC?
No, nothing
Yeah, and
yet.
NP, that's, next week, I think, finally.
Okay, so no reports. Done with that. Commissioners' comments.
I have one quick comment. I happened to be at Hummock Pond today when Solitude Lake Management was doing some launching their small boat to do some Phragmites management, and I don't exactly know all the orders of condition for how they got permitted, but the way that they were operating didn't seem exactly safe. They had 3 people and all their fertilizer in an 8-foot vessel with no one wearing life jackets, and I just felt a little sketchy about them overloading that vessel. I don't know what the vessel requirements or anything like that are, but
I will say that we didn't condition the safety of the vessel,
Yeah,
but I'm
that's-
happy to follow up with Solitude and ask
Say
them
something.
about whether or not they are safely sending operators out there, and see what they come back with.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying they were necessarily doing anything wrong. I just didn't see any life jackets or anything like that.
I would think if you're carrying that level of civil machinery on a smaller vessel, having something to make sure if you happen to fall out or hit your head or do something, you're operating a piece of equipment, that you would want to have some sort of location.
Their insurance provider probably would want that too.
I would also say there may also be, weird as it sounds, for aquatic application and things like that, I'd be curious to know if there were actually some ocean standards that they needed to meet as well. So, but I'm happy to follow up, that's totally not in our purview, but I'm happy to follow up and at least find out what their policy is and what they're required to do, so it would be good to know.
Mm.
What, 3 people and 8, did you say 8 feet?
It was 8 or 9 feet. I mean, it was it was not very big.
You know, with wearing life vests, I would have thought they would be sort of bumping into each other.
I mean, it was a type of small vessel that they had, and
Seems awfully small.
you know, they brought a off-board motor and mounted it right at the site and launched from there.
I'll definitely find out the answer to that. That's interesting.
It almost looks like RJ could speak to that.
Sure.
Sure.
RJ Turcott, Nantucket Land Council. I can't really speak to it, but I can say that I was fielding phone calls yesterday about the same things and concerned neighbors. I don't know if they were supposed to notify everybody they were passing in that boat, but I had 3 different phone calls about that yesterday.
For which location?
One woman named Megan Perry called me as well. And then this one other gentleman, Rick, called, and they were.
Definitely, if you have that, just forward me their information,
Yeah.
and I'll find out what they sent out, because sometimes it's just they don't have contact or they send a notice out. Renters, and maybe
Okay.
someone that's there, and they may just not know, but we'll definitely try to follow up.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I just happened to specifically see this at the horse farm lookout at Henry Pond, because I was at a bird walk there, but it didn't seem safe to me.
Well, I'd say that's the first time that we've actually had any comments or concerns about the work that they've done here, so I'll definitely follow up, because that's something that's out of character for them at this point, especially for the amount of work that they've done.
But I do a lot of certified mailing for HTC, and you'd be amazed how many people do not want to sign and get a certified letter.
Oh, we get, so I will
It's
actually tell you,
incredible.
the
Yeah.
whole reason why we stopped enforcing the requirement for people to bring back the green return receipt cards is because the pickup rate was so low.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's some,
any felons who are avoiding certified letters on the island?
I did one that was 339 abutters notification in Mid-Island, and I would say half of them came back. They were like, nope, I'm not
For
signing.
us, we've had about a quarter that get returned, that people will tell us they get returned back to them without pickup. And then our other big problem for a lot of them is, a lot of them are listed through their trust or whoever, and it's going to Santa Fe, New Mexico, to some accountant that's there that pays their taxes and deals
Oh,
with
yeah,
all those
yeah,
things.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
folks never get it, and then you ask, they come in, they ask, and they're all angry about it. And I'm like, well, it's your address, and they're like, well, that's where I get my taxes set. I'm like, well, then you need to tell your person who does that for you that they need to forward you these when they get them, or you need to go change your address with the assessor. Well, you don't want to do that. So then they're like, well, then you can't complain.
I was brought up
Yeah,
before
stop
the selectmen
complaining.
because the guy said he didn't get notified.
I mean,
Oh,
we
wow.
get, I'd say probably, probably at least 10% of the applications we hear, we have an abutter that comes in and say they didn't get notified. And then you open up the file and you show them the abutters list and the certified mailing receipt. Is that you? Yes. Well, I didn't go pick it up. I'm like, well, then our conversation's over. So,
Jeez.
go away. But, yeah,
It's incredible.
it's wild.
So I have a comment, I know Jeff Jeff sent out an email, but the open meeting law and conflict of interest, meeting tomorrow, so there's one tomorrow night at 6 PM. And then another.
Where's it at?
It's in the community room.
Yes.
Downstairs.
Yes. And then there's a repeat on Friday at 9:30 AM. They say it'll last about an hour and a half, and new members are strongly encouraged, so.
Yeah, if I have to take my car to Boston to get fixed
So
tomorrow.
6 tomorrow? I've never
Six-
sat in. Have you ever been to one?
tomorrow.
Did they have these before? I've never
Yeah,
been to one. I
they've
think I'm
been
gonna go.
a couple times a year.
I mean, I was at a
I've never been
select
to one.
board
That's
meeting
good.
where there was a lot, you know, at some point
Thank
in
you.
time, where the, you know, council went through, you know, all the requirements, but
She does a really good job.
We just did yearly town employees, open meeting law, ethics, all of these.
So,
Simply the same videos.
before everyone escapes, I had something, cause I was thinking, I would propose us having good Maureen, executive session to be able to discuss the Sconset Beach litigation. And, I'd like to, you know, discuss things with George and, you know, kind of see where things are. Is that,
I think that, yes, in the future, I'd like to wait and see what our executive session is tomorrow, and then
oh, you're having another session with the select board tomorrow?
we're having our first.
The first one.
Okay, so you haven't had that yet?
Yeah, I think until we have that information,
Yeah, they'll
we
keep
Oh,
can't
okay.
Great.
kind of pin down.
I do think that is something though that tomorrow I'll make sure that we at least grab George for a minute
Yeah.
before or after, just to talk about that. What's gonna get discussed tomorrow with Ashley and Ian there on the board's behalf as chair and vice chair, to get back to you guys and set that up as an executive session.
Yeah.
So we'll go over those logistics, then we'll just set a time
Good,
to do
thank
that.
you.
We're trying to do it at the regular meeting time, just 'cause it gets weird with some everyone. You either need to leave the room or start early and do it long. So, but we'll find a time that works. We've done it before in places where like a field viewing time, the agenda's small.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Just 'cause it's already on people's schedules, but.
So I won't be here for the next Monday meeting, because anyway, so I'll make the next Wednesday meeting. So if you're doing executive session, have to be.
Well, I doubt we would do it then, because I believe we have to announce at a regular session when there's going to be an executive session.
Yeah, I know
We
there's
have
some.
to go to executive session with the specific exemption being used for the executive session, so.
Good.
It's in the future for
Yeah.
us, but.
My guess is that that won't happen until at least after the meeting on the 24th. I will say, to follow up on that, because I know it was a concern, I'll forward it to people today, because I actually got it today. George did file comments with NEPA on the town's behalf, requesting the full EIR to be filed, and also preserving, letting them know that there's going to be an executive session tomorrow, kind of preserving the town's right to continue commenting, based upon what those discussions are, but encouraging them to put it through the fullest permanent possible, so.
Any other commissioners' comments? Administrative staff reports?
Just to put on a couple things on everyone's radar really quickly, kind of let you guys know of the situation that's happened. The next meeting, there's gonna be something in front of you guys to review, and we'll get it to you early, is there was an incident with a pool, shockingly, on Heller's Way, where the pool operators were discharging into the road, and it made it in, and finally, for whatever reason, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and I know I've told all before, we submitted kind of some blanket stormwater pool illicit discharge regulations to the town, through our office in the health department. That kind of sat in language to get rolled up into this bigger stormwater project. Well, whatever happened last week, and probably for better early this week. And they said, yep, they said, where are those? And we said, well, they're caught up in that. And the town manager said, well, we need those as fast as you can get them to us. illicit discharge regulation for the select board to adopt. They're hoping to gain Board of Health, blessing at their next meeting, which is tomorrow, and then Concom blessing at our next meeting on the 25th. Then they're essentially going to be endorsed from those two to go forward, and then we'll be there. So we'll have that to you guys in advance to review. And then obviously, if you guys have comments, we can do it. It came really quickly. I know we've been kind of pushing for like 3 years on this.
Well, yeah, and
And whatever happened, happened, and we said, well, good, it happened for a good purpose, and then we turned it around in about an hour, and it's only about 4 pages long, so it's not
Oh,
too
excellent.
long to get to, but it covers schools, but also all other illicit discharges, so just as an example, there was a discharge that, that on Bear Street from the back of like the office product building, and the ball stream that's there, would be something that would be covered by illicit discharge, because that doesn't happen currently. So it would include things like that, or other sumps or things that are around, as well as some of the things with pools and their discharge that don't necessarily provide a standard report. Pool, those kinds of things, deals more with the water going in and out of the pool. So, once we get that back from council, we'll get that to everybody in its final form, but we'll try to get at least a draft, excuse me, to see even in advance of that, so that at least concepts and things over there. So, that's coming fast, I just wanted to warn everybody that that is coming, so we don't sit down for the next meeting and you guys go through what it is. So, I will also say too, that it is a framework for the select board. It certainly doesn't preclude us from still having more stringent restrictions inside our area of jurisdiction on top of what these longer are. So, but it's good, so, we're happy about it.
All right, then is there a motion to adjourn?
There is.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Right.
We're done.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Whew, blinding speed.